Chapter 20. Breaking Through the Ice. Max drifted awake slower than usual, the warmth of sleep still clinging to him like a thick fog. For the first time in, well, maybe ever, he had truly rested. No nightmares, no waking up in a cold sweat, just warmth. The faintest trace of Malinar's scent still lingering on his sheets, and the ghost of her presence where she had curled up beside him before slipping out. It felt nice. Too nice. The sudden flash of bright white light in his cabin made him groan, throwing an arm over his face. "Ava," he grumbled, voice thick with sleep. "What the hell?" The AI's voice, laced with amusement, filled the room. "Oh, honey, I have been trying to wake you up for 10 minutes, and you're so cute when you sleep, but you're on duty." Max let out a slow breath and rubbed his eyes before sitting up, stretching out the stiffness from his limbs. As his vision cleared, he saw Ava's holographic form standing at the foot of his bed, arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. He gulped, suddenly self-conscious. What do you need?" Ava huffed. "Your new suit is ready, your shuttle is prepped, and somebody is going down to the surface for a solo mission today. Any guesses on who that might be?" Max exhaled sharply. Right, the mission. He had completely forgotten he was scheduled to head back down to GX 473 today. "Great," he muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Another fun-filled adventure on the gelatinous hellscape." Ava projected a holographic model of the planetoid, highlighting the mission parameters. "Ilvar will drop you at a landing zone near the volcanic region. From there, it's just a nice, scenic walk to the bioweapon ice plains." She emphasized the words with mock enthusiasm. "Where you'll use a pickaxe and sledgehammer to break off a few lovely samples. Those go into the containers you designed, which will then be stored in the cryo container. After that, you get to spend some quality time in the volcanic region for decontamination, and then Ilvar flies you back. No more than 3 or 4 hours, tops." Max groaned and ran a hand through his hair. "Sounds like a great way to spend my morning." Ava smirked. "Oh, don't be so grumpy. At least this time you won't have to evacuate under emergency conditions." Max shot her a dry look before pushing himself to his feet. As he started towards the bathroom to splash some cold water on his face, he paused and turned back. "Why that 70s show?" he asked, curiosity finally overriding his exhaustion. Ava's smirk widened. "Because right now, Max, you're Fez." He blinked. "What?" She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Until you tell them where Earth is? You're the foreign exchange student." Max opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He had nothing to counter that. Damn it. With an exaggerated sigh, he shook his head and walked away, Ava's quiet giggling echoing behind him. Max walked briskly down the corridor, rolling his shoulders as he ran through the mission plan in his head. He wasn't exactly thrilled about going back down to the planetoid alone, but the job had to be done. The ship needed samples of the bioweapon ice, and apparently he was the best suited to retrieve them. Ilvar flies me down, walk to the ice plains, smash off a few chunks with a hammer and pickaxe, secure them in the containment units, head to the volcanic region for heat decontamination, fly back up. Simple enough, if everything went according to plan. But things rarely went according to plan. Ava's voice broke through his thoughts, her holographic form flickering to life beside him. "You seem deep in thought, Fez," Max groaned. "Really? You're still on that?" Ava grinned. "Oh, absolutely. Until you give up the goods on where Earth is, you're Fez." Max shook his head but couldn't help smirking. "Fine. At least Fez got a happy ending." "Ah, but did he?" Ava waggled her holographic fingers mysteriously. "The wisdom of the ages is still out on that one." Max rolled his eyes. "Right. Anyway, you're here for a reason. What do you need?" Ava hummed. "Just making sure you don't forget the important stuff. You do have a plan for not shattering the samples, right? Because from what I understand, hammer plus brittle alien ice equals a bad time." Max exhaled through his nose. That was one of the main issues he'd been considering. The bioweapon's frozen state wasn't like standard ice. It was fragile but elastic, prone to shattering into near-useless fragments. If he went in swinging like a caveman, he'd end up with dust. "I was thinking about scoring the surface first," Max said, adjusting his gloves. Use the pickaxe to make controlled fractures before applying any real force, kind of like how you cut glass. Ava raised an eyebrow. That's actually a solid idea. Practical, controlled, not just brute force. Max smirked. I know, I'm full of surprises. Ava gave him a deadpan look. And yet, you still solve half your problems with duct tape. Max held up a finger. And don't you ever forget it. With that, he stepped into the prep bay. The first thing he noticed was his suit, standing upright on a rack, sleek and well-fitted. The second thing was Malinar and Jifian, both already in the room. His stomach twisted slightly at the sight. After last night's argument between them over him, he half expected things to be tense. But instead, both carried themselves with their usual professionalism. Still, Malinar's presence was a comfort. She was scanning over a medical readout, her large teal eyes flicking toward him as he entered. A small smile tugged at her lips, and her emotions, warm and steady, brushed against his mental walls. He let his guard down just enough to let her feel his appreciation. Shifian, on the other hand, was laser-focused on the final checks of his suit, her forearms working with mechanical precision. When she noticed him watching, she huffed. About time, you're late. Max smirked. Good morning to you too, Shifian. She merely grumbled something in Cordian under her breath and continued her work. With a sigh, Max pulled off his tunic and stepped into the suit. Unlike the standard Interstellar Council EVA suits, which were bulkier, this one was streamlined and flexible, designed with his greater physical strength and endurance in mind. As he adjusted the fit, Malinar stepped closer, running a medical scanner over him one last time. Vitals are steady, she murmured, before leaning in and pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. Good morning, and good luck. Max smiled at the gesture, letting his warmth reach her. Keep an eye on me from up here, yeah? She nodded, gripping his arm briefly before stepping back. Shifian, finishing the last adjustments, frowned as Max began patting his suit down. What are you doing? Malinar's eyes lit with realization just as Max extended a hand expectantly. Without a word, she reached into a nearby kit and pulled out a roll of duct tape, placing it in his palm. Shifian let out an exasperated sigh. Why do you need that? Max grinned. Because duct tape saved our asses last time. Shifian narrowed her eyes. You also abandoned your EVA suit to save Tashar. Max winced as Malinar shot him a soft but firm glare. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, I know. That was not my best moment. Malinar's gaze didn't waver. You promised. Max nodded, his expression serious. I know, and I meant it. No shutting down. I'll come back. Shifian made a thoughtful noise, then waved a dismissive hand. Fine, but if you get yourself killed, I'll be very irritated. Max chuckled. Noted. With that, he grabbed his helmet, took one last steadying breath, and made his way to the shuttle bay. The flight down was smooth, as expected. Ilvar was an excellent pilot, but that didn't stop him from using the trip as an opportunity for amusement at Max's expense. So, Ilvar drawled over the comms, his voice laced with humor, I hear you've got yourself a very passionate following aboard the Horizon. Max groaned, already knowing where this was going. Let me guess, you overheard Malinar and Jifian arguing last night? Oh, I didn't just overhear, Ilvar said with a chuckle. They were in the middle of the mess hall. Loudly. Quite the scene. And quite the debate. One wants to claim you, the other wants you to sire a litter. You humans do move fast, don't you? Max sighed, rubbing his temple despite the helmet. It's not like that. Oh, so Malinar isn't possessive over you? Max hesitated. Okay, maybe a little. Ilvar outright laughed. And Jifian? She seems quite taken with your adaptability. Max shot back. Does that even qualify me as a desirable candidate in Cordian culture? I mean, isn't desirability determined by intelligence and engineering skill? Where does a shuttle pilot rank in the grand hierarchy of potential mates? There was a beat of silence before Ilvar scoffed. You're deflecting. Maybe, or maybe I'm just reminding you that you're not the only one who can poke fun. Ilvar hummed in amusement. Fair enough, Deathworlder. The ship touched down smoothly in the volcanic region, the inertial dampeners making the landing feel like little more than a gentle tap. Outside, The jagged spire-like formations of the landscape stretched across the horizon, and the ice, no, not ice, the gelatinous bioweapon, shimmered in an unnatural way beneath the thin atmosphere. Max exhaled, then stood and grabbed the cryo-container filled with his personally fabricated synthetic storage units. Then he hoisted the bag of tools over his shoulder and stepped onto the ramp. The landscape still breathed beneath his feet. Now, however, it was not just a feeling, but a certainty. He was standing on something that was alive, or at least something that used to be. He wasted no time. Striding toward the frozen bioweapon deposits, he knelt and pulled out his tools. A hammer, a pickaxe. Simple, reliable. Kiss, he thought. Keep it simple, stupid. His goal was straightforward. Carve out roughly half-foot cubes of the material, keeping them intact as much as possible. He didn't trust plasma tools for this. Too much heat, too much risk of altering the material's properties. Just as he scored a 3x3 section with his pickaxe, a familiar, exasperated voice crackled over his comms. "Williams!" Tashar's voice was thoroughly unamused. "What exactly are you doing?" Max grinned to himself as he began methodically applying duct tape over the grid, layering it carefully. "Ensuring the fragments don't shatter when I break them free," Max answered clinically. Tashar's voice rose a fraction. "Duct tape? You're using duct tape?" "Yes." A beat of silence. "Williams, why in all the stars would you use that instead of a proper containment method?" Max kept working as he explained, his voice calm, pragmatic. "If I just strike the ice—" "Not ice. The bioweapon material, the fragments could break off and move fast enough to puncture my suit." He secured another strip of tape before continuing. "Duct tape keeps the structure intact and gives me full control over where the pieces go. Once it's in the cryo container, I'll properly seal it." Tashar sounded as though he was physically restraining himself from an outburst. "You're telling me you're using primitive adhesive tape as a safety measure?" "Duct tape saved the last mission," Max reminded him, smirking. "Duct tape?" Tashar made an incomprehensible noise, somewhere between frustration and resignation. "Duct tape should not be a primary solution in a scientific expedition," Max chuckled. "And yet here we are," Tashar groaned. "If you die down there, I will personally file a report listing duct tape over-reliance as the cause of death." Max just grinned. "Duly noted." He brought the hammer down, cracking the grid loose in a single controlled strike. The tape held. The samples remained intact. Science. Max carefully secured each half-foot sample cube in its own individual container within the cryo container, ensuring that none of the gelatinous bioweapon remnants could escape or interact with one another. With precise, methodical movements, he placed the last of the properly stored samples in the reinforced case. Then, for his own morbid curiosity, he retrieved a smaller sample, an eighth one, and wrapped it in a few layers of duct tape before affixing it to the top of the cryo container. It was a ridiculous solution, but duct tape had a way of solving problems that even the most advanced materials engineering sometimes couldn't. He figured if the thing was dormant in extreme cold, he could observe what would happen when it was exposed to different conditions. With everything secured, he rose from his crouch, stretching briefly as he checked his suit's environmental seals. The next step was crucial. He needed to make his way to one of the volcanic regions. The intense heat would be enough to burn away any lingering fragments of the bioweapon before he could board the shuttle. A necessary precaution. As he began his trek, Ilvar's voice crackled over the comms. "So, Max, about Zephian's interest in your genetic material. Are you planning on siring some prodigious hybrid engineers anytime soon?" Max rolled his eyes and shot back without hesitation. "That depends. How do Cordians value a pilot with a penchant for drinking and gossiping instead of actually flying the shuttle?" Ilvar let out a low, amused chuff. "That hurts, Max. Really, deeply. I'm an excellent pilot. Besides, you'd be doing the galactic gene pool a favor. Just think about it. Brilliant Deathworlder intelligence combined with Cordian precision." "Yeah, no thanks. I've got enough on my plate without cross-species eugenics projects," Max said dryly. Before Ilvar could retort, Max's attention snapped to his suit's internal temperature readout. He was nearing the lava fields, and as the heat climbed, a subtle shift in weight on his back made him pause. Then he heard it, a faint, wet slurp, Max glanced over his shoulder just in time to see the eighth sample, the one taped to the cryo container, shifting. The rising temperature had awakened it. Slowly, it pushed against the layers of duct tape, seeping out in tendrils that shimmered with an eerie, iridescent hue. Then, as if sensing something, it lunged toward him, except his suit was sealed, non-organic, impenetrable. The gelatinous mass oozed over his shoulder, flowing down his arm in search of genetic material to assimilate, but it found nothing. Max tilted his head, watching with detached curiosity as the bioweapon sluggishly attempted to digest what it couldn't understand. "Ava," he said over the comms, "engage my suit's scanners. Let's collect some data on this thing while it's active." Ava responded almost immediately, her tone laced with equal parts fascination and exasperation. "You do realize this is an incredibly reckless approach to scientific observation, right? I mean, I could have just let it slip off and die in the heat, but where's the fun in that?" "Max," Malinar's voice cut through the private comm line, cold and controlled. "What the hell are you thinking?" He could feel the sharp edge of her emotions even through the suit's dampening systems. Frustration, fear, a touch of something deeper. "I'm thinking I'm completely fine," Max reassured her. "Suit's sealed, no risk of contamination, and we need to see how this thing behaves when active. Right now, it's aware that I'm organic, but it can't figure out why it can't consume me." There was a pause, then a sharp exhale from Malinar. "You have no idea how much I hate this." "Noted." The bioweapon shifted, pulling away slightly as the temperature continued to rise. Max observed its movements carefully. It was reacting, self-preservation instinct. "Let's test something," Max muttered, reaching into one of his utility pouches. He retrieved an emergency ration bar, unwrapped it, and with a flick of his wrist, tossed it toward the nearest lava flow. The bioweapon reacted instantly, launching itself from his suit and latching onto the bar as it arced through the air. It didn't even hesitate. A split second later, the entire mass of it plunged into the molten rock. It writhed for a moment before dissolving completely, annihilated by its own gluttony. Max let out a breath, then calmly announced over the open channel, "Well, that answers that. The bioweapon isn't sentient. No intelligent life form would have followed the survival bar into a lava flow." A collective groan filled the comms. Tashar's voice practically vibrated with barely contained frustration. "Max, that is not how scientific observation works. You don't just toss snacks at an unidentified biohazard and draw conclusions like some Death Worlder lunatic." Before Tashar could launch into a full-blown tirade, Cabo's voice cut through. "Tashar, mute yourself!" There was a strangled noise, then silence. Cabo exhaled heavily. "Max, get back to the shuttle. Now." "Aye, Captain," Max replied, unfazed. Ava chimed in, her tone smug. "For what it's worth, the data we just collected is extremely valuable." Max smirked. "See? Always a silver lining?" As he continued toward the shuttle, he could feel Malinar's presence lingering on the private channel. She hadn't said anything else, but he knew she was still there, still watching. He sighed softly. "Mal?" Her voice was quieter this time, but no less intense. "Just get back safe." Max nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I will." And for once, he actually meant it. Max leaned back against his seat, the cryo container safely secured to the shuttle's cargo hold. He watched through the viewport as the last remnants of the duct-taped bundle disintegrated in the lava flow below. A final precaution, just in case the bioweapon had any last surprises. Ilvar, however, had other things on his mind. "So, Max," the Cordian pilot said, his voice carrying that particular lilt that meant he was settling in for a good conversation. "I think we need to talk about your situation." Max sighed, already feeling the exhaustion creeping in. "What situation?" Ilvar made a vague gesture with one of his 4 hands. "You and Jifian. And Malinar, of course. Quite the predicament, no?" Max pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's not a predicament. Malinar and I are together, that's it." Ilvar scoffed. "That is hardly it. Clantech is wealthy, influential, and Jifian has made it clear she values your genes. That alone is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Max opened one eye, staring at the Cordian. "I'm not a breeding stud." Ilvar shrugged, a smirk playing at his lips. "A matter of perspective." Max shook his head, deciding to let that one slide. Look, Malinar and I are figuring things out, and she's not obligated to follow what her people normally do. That is fair, Ilvar admitted, nodding. But Valkyrie are naturally inclined toward multiple partners. The fact that she is so opposed to the idea is unusual. Max frowned. Not really. Humans lean toward monogamy, but that's not universal either. People make their own choices. Ilvar tilted his head, considering. Perhaps, but Xifian is willing to pay quite handsomely for one litter. That could set you and Malinar up for life. Max groaned. I'm not selling my genes to the highest bidder. Ilvar laughed. A pity. Xifian would probably have paid you in engineering resources. I hear she has a personal workshop with some of the best fabrication tools outside of Cordian Prime. Max narrowed his eyes. You're enjoying this way too much. Ilvar's grin widened. Of course. This is the most entertaining thing to happen in weeks. Max exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. You know what? Let's talk about you for a change. He glanced at Ilvar. Do you have a mate? Ilvar's chest puffed up with obvious pride. I do, 5 actually. Max blinked. 5? Ilvar nodded enthusiastically. And I've successfully sired 5 litters. Max's mind stalled for a moment before he hesitantly asked, Litter? Ilvar's eyes lit up, clearly pleased that Max had taken the bait. Yes, Cordians give birth to 5 to 15 pups at a time. Max groaned, slumping back in his seat. I regret asking. Ilvar laughed, patting Max's shoulder. Welcome to interspecies cultural exchange, my friend. The shuttle thrummed as it ascended toward the horizon, the bioweapons remnants now nothing more than data in Ava's archives. Max closed his eyes, silently preparing himself for whatever new insanity awaited him once they landed. As soon as Max stepped off the shuttle's ramp, he was met with a dual-pronged assault. Malinar and Xifian were already waiting, and neither looked particularly pleased. Xifian got to him first, 4 arms immediately reaching to inspect his suit. You didn't compromise the integrity of the seals, did you? She demanded, running a scanner over him with a practiced efficiency. If I have to rebuild another joint system because of your— I followed protocol, Max cut in, his voice even, professional. No rips, no tears, and no perforations. Xifian narrowed her eyes at the readings, clicking her mandibles in frustration. Until I get you out of this suit for a full diagnostic, I won't be certain, but— She let out a begrudging huff. For now, I suppose you're fine. Max nodded once, acknowledging her concern, but his focus was already shifting to Malinar, who stood just behind Xifian, arms crossed, tail flicking sharply. Her teal eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made it clear. She was not happy. He didn't flinch under her gaze, but he did let his mental walls slip just enough for her to sense the truth. He was safe, uninjured, and despite how it might have looked, he hadn't been reckless. Not entirely. He hadn't gone in with a full plan, but he hadn't gone in blind either. Malinar's scowl softened, but only slightly. She sighed, rubbing her temple. You're impossible, you know that? Max offered the smallest hint of a smirk. So I've been told. Before the conversation could continue, Tashar stormed forward, tail bristling, ears pinned back in barely restrained fury. You absolute death-worlder lunatic! He snarled, jabbing a clawed finger at Max's chest. Do you have any idea how many scientific violations you committed in the span of a single mission? Max remained silent, knowing better than to interrupt. Tashar, however, was only getting started. First, you somehow managed to synthesize 7 containment units a day ago, in conditions that should have made it impossible for lab-scale synthesis to work at all. Then, instead of using proper tools for extraction, you took a hammer and pickaxe like some pre-industrial miner. I allowed it, because I assumed you would eventually listen to reason and use a plasma saw as I suggested. But no, you doubled down on primitive stupidity. He took a deep breath, but it did little to slow his rant. And then you decided that duct tape was an appropriate containment reinforcement. Duct tape. Do you even understand how many safety regulations that violates? And as if that weren't enough, he seethed, voice rising, you knowingly took an unauthorized 8th sample, woke it up to observe its behavior, baited a deadly bioweapon into a lava flow using a survival bar, and now you stand here as if that's just another day's work? Silence stretched across the docking bay. Crew members who had gathered to watch the spectacle took a cautious step back, no doubt wondering if Tashar was about to explode from sheer frustration. Max remained impassive, waiting until he was sure Tashar had fully emptied his outrage. Then, with deliberate calm, he said, "I acquired the samples as ordered and obtained data on how the bioweapon acts in a semi-controlled environment." The silence grew heavier. Tashar made a strangled noise, ears flattening so hard they nearly disappeared into his fur. Malinar, seeing the dangerous level of stress in his expression, swiftly pulled a relaxant from her medkit and injected him before he could suffer an aneurysm. Tashar blinked slowly, expression shifting from rage to momentary confusion before his eyes drooped slightly. "You... insufferable." His words slurred as the relaxant took effect, and he swayed slightly before Maruk stepped in to catch him. Captain Cabo, who had been observing from the sidelines, let out a low, amused chuckle. "Well," he rumbled, folding his massive arms across his chest, "as far as I'm concerned, that was a debrief. Max, take the rest of the day off." Shifian clicked her mandibles in annoyance but said nothing. Malinar just shook her head, exasperation warring with the undeniable relief that Max was, in fact, unharmed. Tashar, for his part, was now mumbling something about scientific heresy into Maruk's fur. Max exhaled, feeling the tension finally ease from his shoulders. Max sat on the observation deck, the glass stretching endlessly above him, framing the vastness of space. GX 473, the planetoid they had just left, shrank in the distance, its icy, bioweapon-ridden surface little more than a speck against the backdrop of the stars. The horizon moved forward on its mission, leaving behind yet another strange discovery, and yet Max's mind wasn't on their next objective. It wasn't on the samples, or the data, or even Tashar's near aneurysm. No, his thoughts had turned inward. He found solace in stargazing, though it had never really been his hobby. It had been his mother's, back before she had become the distant, clinical scientist, before the weight of grief had hollowed her out, before she had pushed him toward cold logic and equations, stripping away anything she deemed unworthy of pursuit. His gaze drifted over the stars, and a question gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. Is humanity still out there? 10,587 years? More than 10 millennia since the aurora was lost, since Earth had been anything more than a distant memory. He liked to imagine that humans had survived, that somewhere out there, his people were still fighting, still building, still living. But there was no way to know, no way to be sure. And with that thought, his mind spiraled further, past the unknown fate of humanity, past Earth, and onto something more personal, his family. He could barely remember the warmth that had once existed in his home. His mother's voice had once been soft, filled with praise. His father had once wanted to teach him, to show him things, to encourage his curiosity. But after his aunt's death, something had changed. Love had become distant, praise conditional. Knowledge was valuable, emotions were not. And then, as always, the pain came. That sharp, familiar ache in his chest. He clenched his jaw, instinctively pushing it down, preparing to bury it as he always did. Then two arms wrapped around him. Malinar. Her warmth pressed against his back as she leaned over him, her voice soft, soothing. "I'm here." Max stiffened. He hadn't even realized she was there. Had he really been sitting here that long? He swallowed. "Why? You've been sitting here since my shift started," she murmured, "and you feel like you need someone." Max didn't know how to respond to that. His first instinct was to tell her he was fine, that he was just thinking, but he knew Malinar would see through it. He hesitated, torn between the need to hide and the quiet, aching part of him that wanted, needed to be understood. She didn't push. She simply held him, resting her chin atop his head, her breath warm against his hair, and without a word, she pressed a firm, reassuring kiss to his head. Max's throat tightened. "I have you now," she whispered. "You don't have to do this alone." He swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to," she said simply. "Not alone." Max exhaled shakily. He didn't want to unpack all of this, didn't want to dig through the wreckage of his past, least of all with Malinar, the one person he was terrified of scaring away, but she wasn't letting go. She wasn't leaving. Instead, she pulled him back, guiding him until he was leaning against her, his head resting just below her collarbone. One hand slid into his hair, her fingers carding through it gently. "Trust me," she said softly. Max closed his eyes, and then, slowly, hesitantly, he did. He spoke quietly at first, his voice barely above a whisper, about the night when he was 6, when he realized the mother he had known, the one who loved, was gone. "I was so excited," he murmured, his hands gripping Malinar's arms around his chest. "I'd drawn a picture in school, a trip to Mars, our family all together." He let out a shaky breath. "I thought she'd be proud." Malinar didn't say anything. She just listened. "She barely even looked at it," he continued. "She just scoffed and said art was a waste, that I was meant for greater things." His voice grew tight. "Then she just took it. Used some biogel she was working on, dissolved it, didn't even hesitate." Malinar's arms tightened around him. "That was the first time I realized," Max whispered. "She wasn't my mom anymore, not really." His fingers clenched. "That was the night my heart broke." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken pain. Then Malinar pulled him in tighter, pressing another kiss to his temple. "You're not broken," she whispered. "You're just lost. Scrambled." Her fingers ran gently through his hair, soothing, steady. "And I can help. I will help." Max exhaled, his breath shaky. But for once he didn't push her away. He just let himself rest in her arms, the stars above them silent witnesses to the moment. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than empty. Max didn't say anything for a long time. He wasn't sure he could. The weight of the memories, of everything he had just admitted, settled heavy in his chest. But Malinar held him as if none of it scared her, as if his pain wasn't something to be fixed or dissected, but simply understood. She ran her fingers gently through his hair, tracing slow, soothing patterns against his scalp. "You carry so much pain," she murmured, "so much that was never yours to bear." Max swallowed hard, his throat tight. She shifted slightly, resting her cheek against the top of his head. "Your mother." Malinar hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "She hurt you, not just that night, but over and over again, whether she meant to or not." Max clenched his jaw. He knew that. He had known that for years, but hearing it aloud in Malinar's voice made it feel real in a way he wasn't sure he was ready for. "I was never enough," he said quietly. Malinar's arms tightened around him. "No," she exhaled slowly. "You were always enough, Max. You were just never what she wanted you to be." His breath hitched slightly. Malinar sighed, pressing another gentle kiss to his temple. "You think the way she raised you, the way she shaped you, defines who you are, that you have to be what she made you, but you don't." She pulled back just enough to look down at him, her teal eyes soft, steady. "You're not a machine. You're not just logic and calculations. You feel so much, even if you don't always know how to handle it." Max let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Malinar shifted again, this time moving so that she was facing him more fully. She reached for his hands, taking them in hers, her thumbs brushing over his knuckles. "You are more than what she tried to make you, more than what she took from you." Her voice was firm, certain. "Your past shaped you, Max, but it doesn't own you." Max looked down at their hands, her blue-gray fingers wrapped around his. His hands, calloused from training, scarred from survival, dwarfed hers slightly, but she held on as if she had no intention of ever letting go. "You don't have to keep carrying this alone," she whispered. "You don't have to keep proving that you're worth something." His throat tightened. "Then why do I still feel like I do?" Malinar's expression softened, and she lifted one hand, cupping the side of his face. "Because pain doesn't just go away," she murmured. "Because it's been a part of you for so long that you don't know who you are without it." She gently traced her thumb along his cheekbone. "But you're not broken, Max. You never were." Max exhaled shakily, leaning just slightly into her touch. Malinar tilted her head, her teal eyes searching his. "You are hurt. You are scarred. But scars don't mean the wound is still open." She hesitated, then added softly, "And if it still is, Then let me help you close it. Max's breath caught in his throat. I want you, Max. Her voice was quiet but unwavering. Not your intelligence. Not your usefulness. You. He squeezed his eyes shut, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of her words. He had spent his whole life trying to be valuable, trying to be enough. His mother had only praised him when he succeeded in science, in logic, in something she deemed worthy. His father had distanced himself, too wrapped up in his own grief to see what was happening. The Interstellar Council only saw him as a death worlder, a potential threat, something to be analyzed and handled carefully. But Malinar didn't want any of that. She just wanted him. And for the first time, he realized how much he wanted to believe that was enough. He opened his eyes, looking up at her, his walls lower than they had ever been. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Malinar smiled softly. Then let's figure it out together. Max swallowed. Then slowly he nodded. Malinar pressed her forehead lightly against his, her breath warm against his skin. You don't have to be alone anymore, she murmured. Not if you don't want to be. Max closed his eyes again. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he let himself believe her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Chapter 21. Intoxicating Steps. The silence of the observation room wrapped around them, a comforting cocoon where the universe stretched infinitely before them. Max let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of his own emotions loosen just a little. He trusted her, trusted that she wouldn't turn away from what he had shown her, what he had let her feel. It was terrifying in its own way, but the moment Malinar pulled him into a tight hug, whispering a soft, almost reverent, "Thank you," he realized it wasn't something he regretted. He melted into her embrace, his body slowly unwinding from the tension he hadn't even realized he'd been holding. She was warm, solid. Her fingers traced slow, soothing lines along his back, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt safe enough just to be there. After a long moment, she gently pulled back, tilting his head up so their eyes met. A soft smile tugged at her lips before she pressed a lingering kiss to his forehead. Do you want me to help you sleep again? She asked, her voice warm and knowing. Max hesitated. Last night, when she had guided him into sleep, using her presence to anchor him, had been the best rest he had gotten since waking up from cryostasis. But he still felt like he was imposing, like he was asking too much from her, so he shook his head. You've done enough, he murmured. Malinar's empathic senses betrayed his words. His emotions, still raw and tangled, screamed that he didn't want to be alone, that he was tired of being alone. She hummed knowingly before leaning in, brushing a soft kiss against his lips. Come on, she whispered, standing and pulling him up with her. With surprising gentleness, she wiped away the faint traces of tears still clinging to his skin. Then, her teal eyes locked onto his, filled with something deep and certain. You're ready. Max frowned slightly. Ready for what? She didn't answer, just took his hand and led him out of the observation room. The hallways of the horizon were quiet at this hour, the soft hum of the ship's systems filling the space between them. Max followed without protest, more curious than wary, though he couldn't shake the feeling that Malinar was up to something. They stopped in front of his cabin. Malinar finally turned to face him, arms crossed, her expression somewhere between affectionate and amused. Get a change of clothes, she instructed. Max blinked. What? Go, she said, gesturing toward his door. Change of clothes. Second uniform. He hesitated, but seeing no real reason to argue, complied. Stepping inside his cabin, he quickly grabbed a fresh uniform and an extra set of casual wear. When he emerged, Malinar was waiting, her expression patient but undeniably smug. All right, Max said slowly, eyeing her. What now? Her only response was to loop her arm through his and lead him down the hallway. Max's confusion only grew until she finally spoke. You're too fragile to sleep alone right now. She glanced at him, her voice soft but firm. You did keep your promise not to throw your life away. So tonight, you're sleeping with me. Max's mind tripped over itself. Wait, what? His steps faltered slightly, and Malinar, sensing his sudden emotional whiplash, turned to look at him, her expression equal parts curious and amused. Max ran through the implications, and his brain screeched to a halt as he recalled a crucial detail. He cleared his throat. You usually sleep without a uniform, right? Malinar smirked slightly, her teal eyes gleaming in amusement. That's true. Max exhaled sharply, his mind scrambling for a counterplan before his survival instincts short-circuited entirely. After a beat, he handed her his clothes, then quickly doubled back to his cabin. Malinar, now holding his extra uniform, blinked in surprise. Max? A moment later, he returned, holding one of the oversized shirts he had Ava fabricate for him. It was ridiculously large, long enough to reach past his waist, something he had specifically requested for the days he felt too lazy to wear his uniform properly. He held it out to her. You have to wear this tonight. Malinar stared at him, then at the shirt. Her empathic senses flared, reading the faint panic and underlying strategy behind his insistence. After a moment, she let out a low, affectionate chuckle. You are ridiculous, she murmured, shaking her head. Max huffed. Non-negotiable. Malinar took the shirt, her fingers brushing over the fabric as she considered it. She could argue, she could tease him more, but she could also feel the odd sense of reassurance it gave him, the way it helped him process this new step between them without completely overwhelming him. So instead, she simply smiled, her teasing edge softening into something warmer. Fine, she said, looping her arm through his again, but only because it's you asking. Max exhaled in relief, and Malinar gave his arm a gentle squeeze before leading him toward her cabin. Tonight he wouldn't be alone. By the time they reached Malinar's cabin, Max's mind was a battlefield. His instincts screamed at him, practically setting off alarms in his head. Female, proximity, danger. But his rational mind held the line, reinforcing the truth. She isn't human. This isn't what my brain thinks it is. She isn't trying to seduce me. She was Valkyrie. Her species had cycles. Their interactions weren't dictated by human social norms. They weren't about to do anything inappropriate, as Ava would probably phrase it with a smirk. Malinar turned to him, her large teal eyes filled with amusement and warmth, sensing the careful grounding he was forcing himself through. Then, realization flickered across her face as she glanced at the oversized shirt still clutched in her hands. You want me to sleep in this? She asked, ears flicking curiously. Max nodded carefully. It's more for me than you, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. It'll keep me from overthinking. Her smirk widened, mischief dancing in her expression. Well, if it gets too hot, I may have to take it off during the night. Max's brain short-circuited on the spot. It was an innocent comment. He knew that. He really did. But his human brain, his 18-year-old human brain, couldn't help but conjure all the worst possible interpretations. Every single one is a mistake. Malinar, watching his mind crash in real time, chuckled softly. Then, with a teasing flick of her tail, she took the opportunity to turn him around, pressing a gentle hand against his shoulder. Hold still, she instructed playfully. Max, still mentally buffering, obeyed without question. He heard the faint rustle of fabric as she changed, his face burning at the thought. He pressed his forehead against the cool metal of the cabin wall, exhaling sharply. Why do you do this to me? He muttered, exasperated, arms suddenly wrapped around him from behind. Malinar's warmth pressed against his back, her soft purr vibrating through his skin. Because I can, she whispered, her hands resting gently against his shoulders. His breath hitched. He swallowed, forcing himself to stay still as she helped him out of his tunic. His muscles tensed, his instincts flaring once again. Close, warm, soft, female. Before he ruthlessly pushed them back down. Malinar, completely aware of the war raging in his head, simply hummed in amusement. Max quickly changed into his undershirt and sweatpants, trying not to focus on how her purring deepened when her fingers grazed his back. He exhaled sharply, pressing his palm against his forehead. You are in your cycle, aren't you? He muttered. Malinar chuckled, stepping back and giving him room to breathe. Not yet, she said, stretching slightly. The oversized shirt hung loosely over her nimble frame, brushing just above her thighs, her tail flicking freely beneath it. But that doesn't mean I can't admire my boyfriend. Max groaned, rubbing his temples. Is teasing like this normal for Valkyrie? She tilted her head, considering. To an extent, she admitted, crossing her arms. A month or two before the cycle starts in full, the women tend to pick the male they want and make sure he is very aware of their interest. Max swallowed thickly. He definitely got the message. Still, he forced himself to stay grounded. He turned to face her fully, inhaling deeply before carefully asking, "And after the cycle?" Malinar's teasing expression softened. She stepped closer, pressing her forehead against his. "After," she murmured, her breath warm against his skin. "I'll get clingy, but not as playful." Max sighed, closing his eyes. The tension in his shoulders slowly bled away. "Can we just sleep?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please?" Malinar giggled, brushing a soft kiss against his cheek. "Yes, Max. We'll just rest," she assured him, her tone carrying a playful lilt. She turned, leading him toward the bed. Max followed, only to realize, damn it, he'd slipped up. She isn't human, he had been reminding himself all night. And yet here he was, momentarily forgetting the mantra, letting himself get tangled in her teasing. Malinar, sensing his realization, shot him a knowing grin. "See, you're already adjusting," she teased, slipping into bed and pulling him down with her. Max groaned, hiding his face against her shoulder. "I hate you." She laughed, wrapping her arms around him. "No, you don't," she murmured, her voice full of warmth. Max sighed, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his skin. The anxiety, the spiraling thoughts, the exhaustion, it all melted away as he let himself relax in her embrace. Max drifted back into consciousness slowly, his mind caught in the limbo between sleep and wakefulness. Warmth enveloped him, soft and inviting, his senses dulled by the haze of rest. For a fleeting moment, he forgot where he was. The sterile walls of the horizon, the weight of survival, the loneliness that had haunted him for years, it all faded against the presence wrapped around him. Then he became aware of the position he was in. His face was pressed against Malinar's chest, the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing lulling him into a dangerous sense of security. The oversized shirt he had given her had shifted in her sleep, hanging loose, offering a clear window to the soft, furred valley he was nestled against. Max's body reacted before his mind could. Every buried instinct roared to life with a vengeance, every restraint he had built trembling under the assault of pure, unfiltered biology. His muscles tensed, his breath hitched, and a spike of heat surged through him. Malinar stirred. Her empathic senses flared awake in response to his emotional storm, her teal eyes fluttering open as a slow, knowing grin spread across her lips. "Max," she murmured, voice thick with sleep yet laced with something deeper, something possessive. Before he could stammer an excuse, she pulled him closer, her arms firm yet gentle, fingers tracing the muscles of his back as if grounding him in the moment. He could feel the deliberate press of her body, the way her warmth seeped into him, dissolving his tension yet amplifying the fire burning beneath his skin. "You need to relax," she whispered, her tone both teasing and commanding. "Trust me." Max stiffened, his rational mind desperately clawing for control, but Malinar was relentless. Her hand skimmed lower, tracing the contours of his chest with a slow, exploratory touch that sent electric pulses through his nerves. "I can feel how tightly wound you are," she murmured against his ear, her breath tickling his skin. "That's not healthy, my love." Max swallowed hard, trying to form words, but she was already unraveling his resistance. His body betrayed him, reacting to every subtle shift, every teasing brush of her fingers. Then, with a purring hum, she added in an amused whisper, "You're bigger than a Valkyrie male. That's interesting." His mind short-circuited. A strangled gasp escaped him as she took full control of the situation, guiding him through sensations he had never experienced before. Her touch was both firm and careful, methodical yet affectionate, her lips capturing his in a slow, thorough kiss meant to melt away his defenses. Max had no chance. She knew exactly what she was doing, every stroke of her soft, furred hand sending shivers through his nerves. He clung to her, lost in the sensation of her warmth, the softness of her fur, the way she held him with a mix of comfort and playful dominance. He felt her pleasure echo through her empathic bond, feeding off his own, deepening the connection between them in ways he never imagined possible. The pressure built too fast, too intensely for him to fight it. His breath turned ragged, his body tensed, and then a sharp, shuddering gasp against her lips, a release of overwhelming tension, a rush of sensation so intense it left him weightless, boneless, his mind momentarily blank. Max stared at her through the haze, his breathing still unsteady as his body slowly returned to normal. His mind, however, was nowhere near recovery. What had just happened? Malinar had taken control of him in a way he never expected, never even wanted to press her for, and she was smiling because of it. Not just any smile. No. This was something far more dangerous. It was warm, knowing, and satisfying. The way her teal eyes gleamed in the dim lighting made his stomach tighten again. She pressed closer, her soft fur brushing against his side as her tail remained firmly coiled around his thigh. Max blinked, momentarily lost in the sensation, before she leaned in, stealing another slow, indulgent kiss. He barely had time to register it before she pulled away and spoke. That, she murmured, her voice carrying a reverent awe, was intoxicating. Max stiffened, eyes widening slightly. Intoxicating? Malinar hummed, sensing his confusion, her fingers idly tracing patterns across his chest. I expected it to be intense, but that was more than I hoped for. Her tail gave a gentle squeeze. Where your grief is a supernova of sorrow, what I felt just now was like the explosive formation of a star. Max gulped, suddenly very aware of just how deeply she had felt everything. His emotions, his pleasure, his experience had been something she had shared with him completely. Not just witnessed, but absorbed through her empathic senses, like she was feeling every ounce of his high as if it were her own. And she enjoyed it. The word intoxicating echoed in his mind, making his stomach churn with something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't embarrassment, nor was it shame. It was overwhelming. With a weak smile, he exhaled. Is that why you're so possessive of me? Malinar's ears twitched, her expression softening as she nodded. I suppose it is. She nuzzled against his shoulder. I don't mind that I'm not in my cycle. But it's clear now that this, she tapped a finger lightly against his temple, is a problem, a chemical imbalance, one I'll help you manage when it arises. Max groaned, covering his face with one hand. This can't be happening. She was so calm about this, like she had already decided this was her responsibility now. Meanwhile, he was still grappling with the fact that he had just experienced something so intimate under her guidance, literally. He took a deep breath, staring at the ceiling once more. Mal, I'm not some mindless beast, Malinar hummed, propping herself up on one elbow. I know. Her teasing smile returned. But even you can't deny that you were struggling, and I'd rather help you through it than let it consume you. Max hesitated, biting the inside of his cheek. He hated how reasonable she sounded. It wasn't just about what happened now. She had already made up her mind that this was going to be a regular thing, and that thought terrified him. Are you going to be mean about this? Malinar pouted playfully, her teal eyes gleaming with mischief. Max sighed. It's not that I don't want you to, it's just, I also kind of don't because I'm still just a young man. Malinar considered that, then smirked. Then we compromise. She sat up, stretching her arms high above her head, the oversized shirt shifting dangerously loose on her frame. Once a day, no overthinking, no stress. Before or after our shifts, I'll help you relax. Her smile turned far too smug as she added, but only because I'm your girlfriend. Max exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. This is you being possessive. Malinar giggled, leaning down until their noses almost touched. Maybe. Then, with pure, cruel intent, she kissed him again, slow, warm, and deliberate. But the true death blow came when she pulled back and murmured against his lips, I can't wait for my cycle to start, because then I'll really have fun. Max froze, his brain short-circuited, and before he could even process what she had just said, his entire soul crashed. A strangled groan left him as he turned over and buried his burning face in the crook of his elbow. Malinar laughed, a low, delighted, victorious sound. Max kept his face covered as he tried to recover from the absolute tailspin his morning had taken. His entire body was still thrumming with the aftershocks of what had just happened, and his brain was struggling to categorize it properly. Malinar's possessiveness and warmth were overwhelming, but the worst part? He enjoyed it. That was something he hadn't accounted for. Sure, maybe that was because it was the first time he had shared something so intimate with someone else. Malinar hummed happily as she got up, the sound vibrating through the room like a satisfied purr. He peeked through his fingers just in time to see her stride toward the sanitation unit, her toned figure moving with effortless confidence. She grabbed a towel, tossed it onto the bed beside him, and flicked her tail in amusement. "Don't peek," she teased as she entered the shower. Max groaned into his hands and still didn't move. His brain needed to process everything the only way it knew how: facts, pros, and cons. Facts. Malinar was his girlfriend. She was a Valkyrie. She was an empath and could literally sense his emotions. She was possessive and affectionate. Cons. Were they even compatible? Were they going too fast? Pros. She wasn't mad at him. She seemed happy with him. She agreed to help despite not being in her cycle. She had helped him more times than he could count. Max let out a long sigh and decided to settle on the pros. She wasn't mad and she was happy with him. That's a good thing, right? He slowly sat up at just the right moment. Malinar stepped out of the shower, steam curling around her as she wrapped a towel tightly around herself. Her fur clung to her damp form, and her tail flicked toward the shower in invitation. "You need to shower too," she said, her tone warm and teasing, "or I'll have to take another one just to get you clean." Max groaned and dragged himself to his feet, stretching before trudging toward the sanitation unit. As he passed her, he muttered, "You can peek, but keep it to yourself." A wet slap landed squarely on his back, her tail, a playful but firm thwap. His yelp of surprise was met with a smug chuckle from Malinar. Max sighed and stepped into the hot water, letting it wash away the last remnants of sleep and the lingering haze of the morning's events. As he scrubbed away the tension, Malinar called out from the main room, "We're about an hour ahead of our shifts. What do you want to do with the spare time?" Max paused for a beat before answering, "Want to just chill and watch a show?" Before Malinar could reply, Ava's voice chimed in with far too much excitement. "Ooh! I have the perfect suggestion. A riveting historical depiction of social hierarchies and interpersonal dynamics in a pre-FTL human world, complete with intricate relationship studies and survival tactics. It's called That 70s Show," Ava finished cheerfully. Malinar, intrigued by Ava's summary, perked up. "That sounds interesting. I'd love to see more about human culture." Max, still distracted by his shower, didn't catch the deception until it was too late. Dressed and clean, Max finally settled on Malinar's couch, his still drying hair slightly messy. Malinar was curled up beside him, a warm mug of something in her hands, the scent reminiscent of coffee. He had one too, and together they watched as Ava gleefully played the first episode. Max had some objections to Ava's misleading summary, but right now he was too comfortable to fight it. He wasn't sure if it was the warmth of the drink, the soft couch, or the fact that Malinar was snuggled against his side, but something about this moment just felt right. As the show played, Malinar occasionally asked questions. "Why is he so concerned about that car?" she asked, tilting her head. "Because that's his baby," Max explained. "It's a classic Earth thing. Cars were personal back then. A symbol of freedom." Malinar hummed, sipping her drink. A few minutes later, she frowned. "Wait. Why does the female's father hate the male? He hasn't done anything that bad yet." Max chuckled. "He's overprotective. It's a dad thing." She snorted. "Cabo gives you that look sometimes." Max nearly choked on his drink. "I do not want to talk about that." The episode wrapped up, and Malinar stretched, letting out a content sigh. Then she turned to Ava, her eyes narrowing. "That was not a documentary." Ava, appearing in holographic form, clasped her hands behind her back innocently. No, but aren't you glad I tricked you into watching it? Malinar opened her mouth, then shut it, ears twitching in thought. With a huff, she admitted, "Fine, I liked it." Max groaned as she reached for the remote. "No, no way, we have work." Malinar gave him a teasing look. "One more episode?" Max sighed dramatically, but pulled her closer anyway. "Fine, one more, then we have to go." Malinar purred in satisfaction, nuzzling against his side as the next episode began. And for the first time in a long, long while, Max felt something he thought had died with the aurora. The residual warmth of their quiet morning still clung to Max as he and Malinar made their way to the bridge. The ship's corridors were their usual sterile gray, the hum of distant machinery a constant backdrop. But there was something about the way Malinar walked beside him, her tail occasionally brushing against his leg, her arm brushing against his, that made him hyper-aware of her presence. He was still processing everything, how his morning had gone from waking up in her bed to, well, everything else. And now, as if sensing the exact moment his thoughts drifted too far, Malinar leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Solvikiar," she murmured, her voice carrying a warmth that sent a shiver up his spine. Max blinked, his brain momentarily short-circuiting. "What did you just call me?" She smiled, her teal eyes glinting with amusement. "Solvikiar." He stared at her, dread slowly creeping in. He knew enough about language to tell when a word carried weight, and that one sounded heavy. "Okay, and that means—" Malinar tilted her head, studying his expression before answering. "It does not translate perfectly into Galactic Common, but it is something between partner and bondmate." Max felt his stomach drop. "What?" She let out a soft laugh, clearly enjoying his reaction. "Why do you sound so shocked? It is only natural." "Natural? Malinar, we've been together for 4 days." He ran a hand through his still-drying hair, trying to grasp the sheer velocity of their relationship. "Humans take way longer than this to—" He gestured vaguely between them. "Define relationships like this." Malinar's ears flicked as she watched him, her expression shifting from amusement to something more thoughtful. "That is because humans do not have our traditions." Max exhaled sharply. "Okay, fine. Explain." "Because I feel like I'm missing something really important here." Malinar's tail flicked behind her as she slowed her pace, turning fully to face him. "I come from a sect of my people who believe that a pair must be bonded in soul before they can experience the cycle together." Max narrowed his eyes. "When you say cycle," she nodded. "The time when my body is prepared for bonding, we experience 2 per year. My next one is in 3 weeks." Max felt his brain stutter to a halt. "Oh," Malinar smiled at his reaction. "I have been moving things forward because I wish for our connection to be strong enough before then to form the soul bond." Max forced himself to stay focused, despite the 100 questions buzzing in his head. "All right, and why does this soul bond matter so much?" Malinar's expression softened, her fingers lightly brushing against his wrist. "Because once our souls are bonded, I will always be able to feel you, no matter how far apart we are, and you will be able to feel me." She hesitated before adding, "I could send my emotions to you, Max. If you ever feel alone, you wouldn't have to. I could reach you." That hit him harder than he expected. The idea of never being alone again, of always having someone who could understand even without words, someone who could anchor him when he spiraled. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "And if we don't bond before your next cycle?" Malinar let out a small sigh, her tail flicking behind her. "Nothing would change except we would have more time to decide. But," she hesitated before continuing, "we will return to port soon, and I want the bond in place before then, to help you navigate Interstellar Council space." Max exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure if it was lingering teenage stupidity or if it was just the way Malinar looked at him, like he was something precious, but he couldn't deny that she had a point. Once they reached port, anything could happen. He wasn't naive enough to think everyone would be as accepting as the Horizon's crew. And through it all, Malinar had been his constant, the first person he'd trusted, the one who had held him, talked him down, pulled him back from the edge when no one else could. That had to count for something. He took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. "All right, Let's talk about this properly after our shift. I want to understand everything before I make a decision. Malinar's face lit up, her tail flicking in excitement. Of course! I would not have it any other way. Despite himself, Max let out a small chuckle. You're really enjoying watching me try to process all this, aren't you? She grinned. Yes, you are very cute when you are flustered, Solvikiar. Max groaned, rubbing his face. We're really doing this, huh? Malinar leaned in, pressing another quick kiss to his cheek before pulling back with a smirk. We are. Max shook his head, but he couldn't stop the small smile tugging at his lips as they continued toward the bridge. This was going to be a fascinating conversation later. If you love engaging stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.